We're going to read from 2 Timothy, chapter 4, and verses 1 to 8. 2 Timothy, chapter 4, verses 1 to 8. Just remember, this is a letter, we believe, from a wise old church leader to a much younger church leader. In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead, and in the view of his appearing and his kingdom, I give you this charge. Preach the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desire, they will gather round them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. But you, keep your head in all situations. Endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all the duties of your ministry. For I'm already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. May God bless the reading of his word. Not just the reading, the listening, and the abiding of his word. So what would you write if you knew that it might be the last letter or the last email or maybe the last text that you'd ever write? My guess is that you would focus on what really matters to you. What gave your life meaning and what gave your life purpose. Many folk think this may have been the last letter written by Paul, the early church leader, before he was killed. He was writing it to a young guy, Timothy, who had been following Paul and learning from him, learning how to be a church leader. And Paul's last letter to Timothy wasn't full of deep doctrine. It wasn't a checklist of books that he should read. These are the books that help me. Now, Timothy, read them. Or blogs he should follow, or films that he should see, or even places that he should go during his life. It was a letter of encouragement and inspiration, and in places, some warnings as well. I fought the good fight, says Paul. I've finished the race, says Paul. I have kept the faith. This is who I have been and who I am to the very last. And Paul writes, now Timothy, you do likewise. Fulfill your ministry. You get the idea that Paul is saying, I want you to get to this stage where you're looking back without regret. And you know, there are some characteristics that Paul and Timothy shared, which Paul is alluding to here. Characteristics which raise you from being a regular, and please don't take offense, a regular normal do-gooder, of which there are many in this world, to someone who is not normal. And I want our church filled with people who are not normal. So I've got an easy start, obviously. That's why I came here, you know. Where's the church with the least normal people? Let me be their minister. People who have made a choice, a determination to be anything but normal. Now, a while ago, I read this book. Hopefully, if you click one of the arrows, it should go through to the next one. There we go, Not Normal. It's a book by some Americans, 7 Quirks of Incredible Volunteers. It's based around volunteering in church setting, but it could apply anywhere else, but it does talk particularly about church life. And the idea that you can be perfectly normal, but to be a great volunteer. And I think, from what Paul is saying here, to be someone who has fulfilled their ministry and their call, whether a church leader, a preacher, someone just with oversight over a small group of people, a large group of people, basically to be anyone who achieves within God's kingdom. You need to be a bit not normal. You need to be not normal. And so this morning we're thinking about what it means to be not normal, and particularly with an eye to volunteer and service within the church. But it could apply anywhere, but we'll focus within the church. So to be not normal, to be an incredible volunteer, in all honesty, to be someone like Paul and Timothy, you need to invest more, not less, for a bigger return. If we go to the next slide. And I'll explain what that might mean. Imagine when you first start volunteering, somebody is announcing a volunteer opportunity from the church, from the front of a church, or even, somebody in your local club. And what can happen is this: you think, do I have time for that? And we've all been here. And you think, yeah, I've got time for that. But what I'll do is I'll start small, and I'll give a little bit of my time, and I'll see how it goes, and I'll have an exit strategy just in case, right? In case it doesn't work out. That's okay. That's perfectly normal. I often approach ventures like that. I'm very prepared and methodical. But if we're constantly doing that, I want to argue that makes us, in the eyes of the property market, renters, not owners. And I'll explain. Let's go to the next slide. I told you this would be a slightly different way of looking at 2 Timothy. This is a block of flats called Parkfields in Malvern. Now, just to the left of that picture, there is an even smaller block of flats that I couldn't get on Google Earth. And that was our first rental property in Malvern. It was a 1-bedroom flat in Malvern. It was small, it was very cold, and it was surrounded, even for a place like Malvern, by the kind of people that maybe might not increase property prices, let's say that. In fact, at one stage there was an ambulance parked in the car park that had been converted to sell kebabs, and we used to call it the kebabulance. And it was abandoned there. And I remember one day watching somebody trying to tow the kebabulance away. It was that kind of a block of flats. People would dump their cars outside. I think it's probably changed now. And we rented there. And we rented there for a while. But in the end, we managed to save enough money, and we just felt it wasn't for us. The thing about renting is often, it is temporary. Often it's problem-free relatively. So the boiler broke, and our biggest problem was getting the landlord to fix it, not paying for it, thankfully. We did not have to pay for the boiler, but we did have to contact the landlord. In the short term, renting can cost less. And with renting, you can give it quite a short-term commitment, can't you? The assured short-hold tenancy lease that we took out was 6 months, but we could have given a month's notice and we could have been gone. That's renting. But then we moved. If we go to the next slide. There we go. Renting is temporary, problem-free, relatively, costs less, usually short-term commitment. Next slide after that. There we go. That was our first house that we bought. Our first property. It was a maisonette, actually. You may not be able to see properly, but this is looking at it from the highest side. And then if you look at it from the back, it's the lowest side. The road was like that. You had a road at the top and a road down there and the flats. And we lived in the top 2 stories of that flat, and that was the first property we bought. And not only did we buy that property, that there was a boiler in it. There was a decent boiler, but the windows were old, so we put in double glazed windows. In fact, that door there was our door, the one on the white door. We chose that. And we had nice little windows, so you could see who it was. You didn't have to open the door. We had the windows at the top there, and it made it a lot warmer and a lot quieter because it was quite a noisy road with a pub at the top and a pub at the bottom. You could just imagine the kind of people we had wandering past. And our attitude towards it changed. We were willing to pay money for a nice door and for nice windows. In fact, we did something with the front garden. That's an older shop, but we also tidied up the front garden, even though we didn't directly look onto it. That was the people below us. Because generally speaking, owners, and again, this is general, and if we go to the next slide, owners are in it for the long haul. So we didn't put those windows in knowing we'd leave in 6 months. You just wouldn't do it. Owners are problem solvers. So we had problems with the radiators. And rather than call the landlord in, we tried to solve the problem ourselves. It went a bit of a... Does anyone know the difference? You've got the normal radiator pipe and you've got micro-bore radiator pipe, you know, the really narrow stuff. And I remember this was when we were decorating, we took the radiator off, it drained it and everything, split the pipe. The water was just pouring everywhere. And it was just to decorate. In the end, I needed to call a professional in. But I was a problem solver. And the problem was solved by a professional, not me. Owners generally are bigger spenders because it's your property. So you're investing in it. And so when it comes to voluntary work, when it comes to volunteers within the church, volunteers who aren't normal, the really incredible volunteers, they are more like owners than renters. And when I read Paul's letters and I hear about his life, I realize that Paul was an owner of the vision. He didn't just rent it. He didn't just tag along temporarily to this idea of life in the kingdom. So not normal volunteers like Paul and like Timothy own, they don't rent. But secondly, owners believe, if we go to the next one, I hope, they believe deeply in what they're doing. For owners, it's always personal. It's not a business opportunity, or I'll do this because it's a chance for me to develop character, or I'll do this because, I've got nothing better to do than fill my time. When it comes to ministry or to calling or to volunteer opportunities in general, it becomes deeply personal. And they believe deeply in what they are doing. There was a time I used to do a lot of reading around these big mega churches and how these big mega churches became big mega churches. But you know what the one consistent thing was about these churches? Was what they call the founding story. The beginnings of these churches were a group of people who believed deeply in what they were doing. They weren't just doing it because the other church down the road wasn't doing a good enough job. They believed deeply in what they were doing. From the very beginning, they understood. And that deep belief carried them through when many of us would have given up. So owners believe deeply in the vision of what they are heading towards. Owners, and this is quite an American way of looking at it, wear the t-shirt. When I was at university, played for a university football team, and I remember that after the first few games, we got a new kit sponsor and a new kit. And there is no photographic evidence of this kit. It was horrific. I have no photos to show you of it, but I'm going to try and get you to picture it. It was a cross between bright orange and bright pink. I don't know what it was called, but it was a cross between bright orange, bright pink, and the shirts were skin tight. And we were a student football team, but there were some students who obviously must have got a bigger grant than others because they were slightly larger than others. So you can just picture these skin tight, bright orangey pink tops. And we were the ridicule of Ceredigianshire. we'd play against all these teams. They were like, what are they wearing? It was just, and the shorts, it was just, I started to get flashbacks. But I would have given anything to wear that shirt because I wanted to be the one on that football field. And so when they were like naming, they were calling the people, getting the list of the players and saying which shirt you had. I wanted the numbers that I knew would start. I didn't want a number that I would be on the bench. I wanted to be part of the 15, even if it did mean that I'd looked an idiot. Because we simply loved to play football. That's what we were there for. We believed in what we were doing. So we wanted to wear the T-shirt, however stupid it looked. And that's the thing. Sometimes we may be asked to do things that we're not comfortable in, whether it's wearing stuff or appearing on a platform like this, and we just don't feel that that's our natural calling. But essentially, think about it like wearing the T-shirt, because what you're doing is you're representing what you believe deeply in. And that's so important. Owners wear the T-shirt. They say, I'm proud to represent this. It's like when I go around representing you, I'm proud to say, yeah, Welshpool Baptist Church. Sometimes I have to explain the difference between us and some others, but that's okay, because I'm glad I'm this side explaining the difference, not another side. So I will wear the T-shirt. How are we going to respond when we're asked to effectively wear the T-shirt for what we believe in, for what this church believes in? Because, for all your imperfections, I believe deeply that we're called here. And for all my imperfections that you haven't discovered yet, I think you might agree. And that's the reason that we're here now. Because we believe deeply in something. So owners believe deeply in what they are doing. And they constantly review that. And they constantly measure their passion. And there will be times where your passion is not as strong as it was. And what carries you through is that there is a deep belief. Sometimes the passion can go up and down, but the deep belief in what you're doing means this morning I'm going to get up and I'm going to get on, I'm going to do that. Not because I feel like doing it today, but because I know that that's what I've been called to. You imagine Paul and the challenges he faced and the times where he would think, is this worth it? And I'm sure he always circled back to yes, it is. Because our feelings aren't the best judge of what is right for us sometimes. Owners push the limits. Sometimes the things we've done successfully for years no longer works. And it's very normal to keep things the way they are because that's how it's been before and it's worked before. But owners will look for new solutions. Think about new things you could do with your house or your car. You look for new solutions if you're an owner. And when I think of Paul and how he faced so many challenges in so many different places, and as he struggled to set up new churches, how he searched for new solutions to reach those who are far from God. Whether it was, I'm going to preach near the synagogue because I know there will be people who believe in the one true God and I can talk to them about Jesus. Or when there is no synagogue, so what does he do? Oh no, my model of church planting's just been thrown out of the water. How do I change this? So he finds a group of women praying near a river in Philippi. He looked for new solutions to what was essentially the same challenge, to bring people into an encounter with the living Christ. But he never lost his core beliefs. Those didn't change. He never compromised on his understanding of what the good news meant. Think of what he wrote here. He said there's going to be other teachers and they're going to try and lead you off. Stay true, Timothy. Stay true. In his search for those who did not know God, he did not water down the consequences of following Jesus. So people like Paul look for new solutions and they push the limits. But it's worth noting that people like Paul also know and understand that pushing the limits has boundaries. So they have enough respect for their leader, and that's not necessarily me. That could be leaders within your group, leaders within your workplace. You have enough respect that you operate within the context of that cause, and that you operate with unity, and that any conflicts that may arise are dealt with graciously. You know, this is worth a very brief mention. We might go into this in more detail when we talk about how we live a good life. But what can happen in environments like the church is there can be tension between people. Can you imagine? Not here, I know, but maybe in other churches. There's tension between people, and tension can be anything. It can be a word said that's caused offense. It could be the way somebody operates. The character of somebody's slightly different. You know, you're like me, you're a real prepared person, and the other person might be kind of last minute, and that can cause tension. And what can happen within relationships like that is the tension's never dealt with between the two people. It can get triangulated onto somebody else. So this person is telling the head of the triangle about the other person, and the other person is telling the head of the triangle, and the head of the triangle thinks, how do I solve this? How do I solve this? Well, I mean, you can study sociological texts which can give you advice, or you can turn to the Bible, which says, if another believer sins against you, go privately. Point out the offence. If the other person listens and confesses it, you've won that person back. So the reason I mention this in the context of pushing the limits is there will often be conflict, especially when we start to push at limits, because sometimes the limits become quite personal. And so I just counsel you, and I hope I follow my own advice, that if ever there is conflict between you and another believer in this church or in another, that you start to deal with it graciously with that person first, without bringing another person into the mix. Do it as Jesus would have you do it, with understanding, with grace, and with gentleness. Because there will be conflict. It's not that we disagree, it's how we disagree that defines our walk with Jesus, and importantly as well, our walk with others. But owners also invest more for a bigger return. What does this mean? What does this mean? Well, we moved to Colford, and we moved to Amance. And next door, there was a house there that had recently been sold. And between us and the house, there was a hedge. And for about 2 winters, we assumed there was no window in that side of the house because it was so dark, you could never see it. And in fact, the hedge was so thick, and not just the hedge, but the brambles. The brambles were so thick, they reached almost up to the roof of this house. And then one day we saw a light in the brambles. And we realized there was a window there, and we'd been living next door to this house and playing within about 4 feet of this house without realizing there was a window there. The brambles were just overgrown. And over time, these people bought the house and they started to reduce the brambles. That was the first thing they did. Then they started to remove the render off the wall because the render had been cracked, and the problem with render is that water gets in, can't escape, and it can soak through. They stripped this house. It took them years. They were still working on it when we left. But you see, they were looking for a big return. They weren't looking to just make a cozy little life for themselves. They could see that in the future, their future in this house, whether it was to sell it and make lots of money or to live in it long term, their future depended on investing up front in the work that needed doing. They wouldn't see the immediate benefit. It would be a long, hard winter for them, and it was certainly a long, hard spring for them, but they were looking forward to the end result. Investing more up front, knowing you'll get a bigger return. In 2 Timothy, we get the glimpse of a man who is reviewing his life's work. And he's literally given everything for the cause of following Jesus. And he's looking back. And he says, I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. You know, Paul owned the cause. He was an owner and not a renter. From the very beginning, when he met Jesus on the Damascus Road, from then onwards, he gave all he could to follow Jesus and to do his will. For Paul, it was a long and a hard road at times. And it might be for us. But as he neared his destination, he could look back at all he had invested, his time and his resources and his life itself. And what did he say? He said, it's been good. I have fought the good fight. It's been worth it because I've finished the race. He's held nothing back. And that is not normal. That is not normal, and it is not easy. But then volunteering, throwing yourself into a cause that you believe deeply in, is really not normal. And following Jesus is anything but normal. Do you know, this morning, what I don't want us to go away with is the idea that we need to work harder. Only we work harder, we need to work harder, that's the solution. It isn't. The solution is not necessarily to work harder. But the solution is partly to believe deeply in what we're doing, to be prepared to push the limits, to own this vision of life in the kingdom, and to be willing to invest because we know the return will be worth it.